some wonderful pedagogical shifts that say if we narrow this and go deeper, not only in terms of the content, but the way we engage children with this, in some senses the payoff will be wonderful around two things: their acquisition of deeper and better knowledge, but really the kind of hook that basically says, I can learn this, I am responsible for this learning, and this learning is fun, interesting, as opposed to giving back some M&A questions, etc. So that's the thrust of it. All right? But as you look at the politics of the things that John reads and so forth, there is all sorts of suspicions around this work and why would we do it, who's doing it to us, who's manipulating us, who's behind the shadow, and so forth. And this is an attempt after 40 years of doing this kind of work to talk about how this thing should play out and at least a frame to talk about it. Because in California, immediately this thing becomes polarized in an interesting way. All right? And it is polarized differently in California. All right? So in every decision making, all right, you can talk about this, all right, on some sort of scale in which somebody says, because of my position, so we can be a union or a management, we can do a superintendent, a principal, or a teacher, or a child, all right, this is my decision. And the reason it's my decision is because I have expertise and I have responsibility and authority, and so I'm going to implement. That's clearly a position that, and over here you can basically say, this is your decision. You take it, you have accountability, responsibility, and let me know if you need anything. All right? And that's the spectrum of the set of pieces you see in front of you. But if you look at kind of the way to move across this in some reasonable, simple way, and then look at the complexity of the politics kind of as it hits the ground. So the next position is simply, this is my decision, but I will basically inform you. Kind of a first level of respect. Logical respect, respecting quotes, but I will tell you. At some level you have the right to know that I'm going to do this to you. This is my decision, but, and this is in some sense the trickiest position. Across, this is the trickiest position with respect to a relationship, a family, and certainly our organizations. This is my decision, but I am going to get your input first. I do not promise that I will use it. I don't say that. And if you look at some senses, the early language in California with explicit kind of language around this is, you need not join or engage the organized labor groups in the implementation of Common Core State Standards, but you should consult them. Right? And that is a legalistic frame of meeting and conferring at some level. It is this piece, in some general way. It is my decision as an administration, but, and I can't do it alone, and the statute says that, but input is in some senses between here and the old informed. That is to say, it's hard to know exactly. And we'll talk about that a little bit, the slippage here. All right? This is a trust slippage or advancement. You basically say, this is my responsibility toward the statute, but I will inform you because the statute says I should. This is my decision. I will get your, in a meet and confer fashion, I will get your input, but I don't know whether I'll use it. The third is in some sense it's broader than it looks. This is our decision. But our decision in some senses, I need not go there by statute, but I could decide to go there. I could decide to engage principals, staff, in not only the decisions around the design of it, but the implementation of it, the training of it, and so forth and so on, the whole ball of wax. And then the question would be, do I need language to do that? Legal language, or do I need compacts, or do I need MOUs, and so forth and so on. And then the next series are really, this is your decision. Right? This is your decision, but you have agreed to tell me where you are going. Very typical of how you would treat a professional in most of the country. That is to say, are you agreed? This is the work schedule. Are you with me? All right. Tell me, in some senses, how you're going to move. Tell me if you've got problems. Go. This is much of what we say to a classroom teacher. This is your decision in the next piece. It says, not only is this your decision, all right, but you're going to get input from me and so forth and so on, but it's still your decision. And the last piece is, this is your decision, yell if you need my help. But it's an attempt to say, look, that's a cognitive way to talk about it. Now impose very quickly, and I'll get out of your way, but I want this to be kind of a way to pull this in the room and be able to talk about it as we talk about the content of what they're going to basically lead us through. Somewhere between here and here, all of this happens in an organizational culture, a school culture, it's organizational culture. And this thing moves constantly back and forth. The healthiest thing I can say after 40 years of doing this in the private and public sector is, the healthiest thing you can do is have an ability to, when you do not know where it is, or you are confused, or you are not happy, you have the ability to say to the other, why are we here, and what could we do about talking about it? If you cannot make it explicit why you ended up here and not here, you don't have you may have all the content expertise in the world, but you do not have the ability to say to each other in the room, in the moment, why are we doing it this way? Right? Because if you can't do that, you have no chance of, in some senses, negotiating it up and down. Then, in some senses, I would simply say the movement in here is always a legitimate kind of movement up and down. Some things ought to be here. Right? And by the by, this could be a management or the union. It could be the principal or the teacher. I'm trying to use it vertically or horizontally. The only issue is, do you have an authentic and high trust level to talk about it? Why it's here and not here? And do you have the ability to push each other to say, I think it ought to move more this way, and the administration or someone else says, no, I think it ought to be back this way. If you look at what's playing out, just even on the table early on in California, last piece, is this comes with kind of a tricky piece, which is to say there's some sort of money involved. And there's a time piece that says you better be ready within X amount of time. Once you say this, you put stress on this. And it stresses both groups to say, I want to move it this way or this way. All right? The management's tendency, it's clear and it's goodwill, is we got to get this done. I'll tell you why we're going, let's go. I'll tell you where I'm going, let's go. The tendency is not to say, let's do it some deep, organic, and so forth. The union over here sees this and says, and sees voice, possible sword, and wants to move it to more careful kind of joint language and so forth and so on. Those are natural positions. You must have a way to talk about how it stopped here, or how some group wants to talk about it here. You have to be able to do this back and forth. And if you have an overall trust culture, you have the ability to talk about it. If you do not, this thing arrests here and starts to build tension here. And if you then go back to the overall purpose, the purpose is in some senses to go deeper with children around content and our ability to engage them and each other in deep teaching and learning. That's the core. This will basically, the trouble is that this thing swings this basically into a polarization, and it happens in the very best places. If you don't have culture at all of trust, then in some senses you don't even have the chance to have the dialogue. It'll be interesting for you to hear, this is in some senses the way they live, and they're unconscious at some level about the fact that they keep moving this way, all right, constantly with constant dialogue, and their problem solving, in my judgment, starts over in here at a 5-6 position. My guess it goes back when it has to, all right? But I want you to hear, because I've got enough kind of conversation with other folks in this room and other districts that I respect a lot, to know that this thing in some senses has not gone to a natural place. And because of this has swung probably back further than they usually operate. Those are all very interesting pieces that ought to be talked about in this room as we talk about the expertise they are basically going to talk about in terms of moving teacher voice into the design of common culture. That's the agenda. Sorry it took so long